'Twas battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it hardly worth his while to waste his time on the old violin, but he held it up with a smile. "What am I bid, good people?" he cried. "Who starts the bidding for me? $1, $1, do I hear two? $2, who makes it three? $3 once, $3 twice, going for three." But no. From the room far back, a grey-bearded man came forward and picked up the bow. Then, wiping the dust from the old violin and tightening up the strings, he played a melody pure and sweet as the angel sings. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quiet and low, said, "What now am I bid for this old violin?" as he held it aloft with its bow. $1,000, $2,000, do I hear two? $2,000, who makes it three? $3,000 once, $3,000 twice, going and gone, said he. The audience cheered, but some of them cried, "We just don't understand. What changed its worth?" Swift came the reply, "The touch of the master's hand." And many a man with life out of tune, all battered and bruised with sin, is auctioned cheap to a thoughtless crowd, much like that old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and he travels on. He is going once, he is going twice, he is going and almost gone. But the master comes, and the foolish crowd never can quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that is wrought by the touch of the master's hand.
So a quick story. When I arrived at St. Bartholomew, the Apostle Church, my first year, my first Lent there in the parish, I was sitting down with Father John, and I said, "Father John, I got a great idea for the two of us, as brother priests, to do for Lent." And they said, "We're going to give up alcohol." He looks at me, and he says, "You try to pull that off, you better find another place to live, because that's not going to happen." So I knew I was in the right place, and we were going to get off real well.
You know, since you went off script, I'm going to go off script. So how did Father David and Father John wind up together? I get this call one day, and it was the bishop, the archbishop, and which is unusual that he would call himself. He goes, "Father Paladino, I'm going to ask you to take Father David Santos as your parochial vicar." And the ironic thing is that I was the director of clergy personnel, so I know all of the priests. But him I didn't know. And I don't know why that was. To this day I really don't know.
You needed help.
Yeah. So, like any good director of personnel, I immediately start calling a couple of priest friends of mine and I said to them, I said, I was asked to take Father David Santos, but I don't know who he is. Can you tell me something about him? Both of them had the exact same answer. He's okay. I said, well, besides that, like, the Archbishop kept saying he was Portuguese. I said, how's his English? And they both said, it's okay. Yeah. So I said, who is this guy I'm getting? He's just okay. And well, anyway, we met. There was a certain criteria. One of them was there is alcohol in the house. But ever since then, it's been great.
It's great to have you here, Father.
That's probably the only nice thing I'll say about you the whole 3 nights.
Don't assume I'm going to say nice things. But friends, as you look over your life, a good question to ask ourselves as we begin this mission is, have you ever been touched by the Master's hand? The woman in today's gospel, she comes to the well looking for water, and she had probably done that every day of her life for so long. But on this day, something changes. She encounters the Messiah, Jesus, and she felt the touch of the Master's hand in her life, and it changed everything. It's our hope that this week's Lenten Parish mission will help you to realize that your life has been touched in so many ways by the Master's hand. Because God is constantly reaching out to us. He's constantly touching us with his loving embrace. So it's our hope that over these next few days you'll have that experience of being touched by the Master's hand. So for a moment I want you to imagine something. Picture an ugly glob of paint. And it's hanging there on the end of Michelangelo's paintbrush. And it's a brush made of hog bristles. So now watch and imagine as Michelangelo, he takes and applies the paint to canvas. And with objects altogether common, ordinary pigment, hog bristle paintbrush, and plain canvas, he begins to create this beautiful masterpiece. You know, sometimes I think when we look at ourselves, we become disheartened. We see ourselves as little more than a tangle of faults and weaknesses, a mess. But this is to forget that God can take us, imperfect and blemished as we are, and transform us into something beautiful. Just as an artist working with the vilest materials produces a ravishing masterpiece, just as the old man did with the old violin in our video.
You know, everyone in this place has the desire to feel good. In my work as a hospital chaplain years ago, I heard regularly, "Father, help me to feel good. Father, help me to feel good." And we know that pharmaceutical companies have made billions and billions of dollars on our desire to feel good. It's a legitimate desire. But I think the real issue is, the underlying issue is we want to feel God. Take out one O. We want to feel God. We want to be touched by the Master's hand. You know why that's true? Because we are from God. We are not simply human beings who occasionally have spiritual experiences. No, we are spiritual beings who at present are having this human experience. When we say we want to feel good, and I think we want to feel God, because it connects us to our very source of being. That's what this mission is all about. Connecting us to our source so that we do indeed feel good.
It might sound kind of strange, but God wants to find you as much as, and if not more, you want to find him. God is not some tyrant as we often imagine him being. Some tyrant that's at home, sitting on his throne, just not moving and expecting his children to come to him, to beg for his forgiveness, to beg for his mercy. But our understanding of God is actually contrary to that. It should be. God is the one who gets up off the throne. He's the one who leaves the house and comes running after us, ignoring his dignity, running towards us to welcome us home. God's love, friends, is always a love that welcomes us back. It's one that celebrates us as his children. You know, all of us in one way or another, we're hurting, we're struggling, we're suffering, we don't feel good. Therefore, it's the Master's hand, that holy hand, that sacred hand, that reaches out to each and every one of us.
You know, let me give you a concrete, personal example how my life has been touched by the Master's hand. You know, all of us probably here have a devotion, perhaps to the Blessed Mother. A devotion I have is to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and I'll explain why. But every morning I do this consecration to the Sacred Heart. I think most of you could identify with having a devotion to some. You know, Father David's Portuguese, devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. That's what he'll tell you. I could tell you his real devotion is to Our Lady of the Pillow. You think he's upstairs saying the rosary, he's taking another nap. But since I was a child, since I was in first or second grade, I always wanted to be a priest, but I never made that decision until my last year of college. I made the decision perhaps as I was entering my last year of college, around September. Well, in November of that year that I made the decision to enter the seminary, and I had told my parents, my father was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and it was very rapid movement. He was dead within 4 weeks, early December. And I remember the emotions like it was yesterday, the anger, the hurt, the sadness. I remember I was in church one day alone and yelling at God, saying, how can you do this to me? The person who instilled in me my faith, my love for God, my devotion to the Blessed Mother, all of that came from my father. And now my father would be the one not there to watch me serve as a priest. I was very angry, very upset. The spiritual director that I had at the time suggested before I actually enter the seminary that I go on retreat for a week to identify the feelings that were going on inside of me. So I went up to Wernersville, Pennsylvania, Jesuit Retreat Center, and as I entered the building, the mansion that the retreat was at, I was told that Father Gary would serve as my spiritual director for the week. He's a Jesuit priest, blind early on in life because of diabetes. So I went into his office, and after the normal pleasantries, he said, I have a question for you. Because he said, first of all, John, I sense a heaviness about you. And I said, well, you might not be as blind as you think, because I'm heavy. I was born this way. But he said, no, there's a heaviness about your spirit. And he asked me one question. He says, have you given yourself time to grieve over the death of your father? And like a ton of bricks, I automatically started crying and crying. I couldn't really speak at all. And he says, John, take a walk around the property for the rest of the day, and we'll meet again tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So as I was walking around the property, I came upon this big plateau, and on the plateau was the statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And Jesus is pointing to his heart, and his other hand is facing downward where a bench is. So I sat at that bench, and as I was weeping, all of a sudden I heard the voice of the Master who said to me, John, it's okay. Your father is okay, and you'll be okay. Do not be afraid. And from that moment, the tears of sadness turned into tears of joy, because I really felt the Master's hand, the touch of the Master's hand. And for the rest of that retreat, my tears were tears of joy, tears knowing that my father was okay, that I would be okay. Especially I felt that at the Eucharist, right at the table. I felt God's presence in a powerful way. The Master's hand touched me through that experience and through Father Gary.
As far as human relationships go, the bond that's created between a son and his mother is unique. While boys tend to emulate their father in many aspects of their natural development, I think it's really the maternal influence that seems to penetrate the deepest into a young man's heart. So during my first few weeks of the seminary, my first year, my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. As you can imagine, or maybe you've experienced, the thought of losing your mother carries with it an indescribable, haunting feeling. And you're just inundated with so many unanswerable questions. I kept asking myself, why? Right? Why her? Why now? Why me? Why not me? I had a privilege of accompanying her throughout the process of determining what type of treatment she would eventually take. And so during this time of visiting doctors, I took a break in between one of the doctor visits and I went to a mall. And so I'm walking around the mall, and all of a sudden, I didn't expect how the Master's hand was going to lead me this day. I come upon this bookstore, and in the front of the bookstore there's a table with a bunch of books, and one book in particular that stuck out. And it really spoke to me. Maybe it was because initially it was an image of John Paul II, St. John Paul II, which caught my attention. But this book, the title is Let Me Go to My Father's House, was a book that just spoke to me in that moment. It helped me to see that in my mother's suffering, in a real way, that suffering could be transformed into something beautiful, which is so hard to imagine. And it talks about John Paul II's many struggles with physical illness and etc. Well, eventually, thanks be to God, my mother's health improved, so did her faith, and so did mine. The Master's hand touched me through a book and through my mother's ordeal.
And many a person with life out of tune, battered and scarred with sin, is auctioned cheap to the thoughtless crowd, much like that old violin. But the Master comes, and the foolish crowd never can quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that's wrought by the touch of the Master's hand. The worth of a soul and the change that's wrought by the touch of the Master's hand.
Friends, Father John and I would like to invite you, your families, and your friends to join us on this mission. It'll begin tomorrow, Monday, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, here in the church from 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. 1 hour. 1 hour. I'll try to make sure that Father John doesn't go over that. 1 hour. If he's singing, I can't, who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
On Monday, so the theme is the Eucharist. Jesus goes viral, so we must also go viral. On Monday, come and listen and experience the immense love that God the Father has for each and every one of us as we claim our blessedness. And then on Tuesday, come listen and experience how the love of God, present and shown in the suffering of his Son, Jesus, and also in our suffering, can transform us into gateways of new life as we claim our brokenness. And then on Wednesday, just as Jesus was given to the world as a sign of hope, we too are called to be ourselves a sign of hope to the world as we claim our mission. Jesus was blessed, broken, and given. So are we. For that, the Father's gift to Jesus was the salvation of the world. And because of that, Jesus has become for all of us the Eucharist, present always and everywhere.
Yeah, as Father David said, like Jesus, we are blessed, we are broken, we are given. So now is the time to rediscover Jesus, not just for our own sake, but for our children and their children, for the sake of the church, for society at large, and for all humanity. Because look around you. The world is constantly grappling with crisis and war. People are weary from the dysfunction of their lives. The chaos is crying out for order. The complexity is crying out for simplicity. At every level of society, from the beggar on the street to leaders of nations, we are all looking for something to solve the crisis of our lives and of our times. My friends, it's time to stop looking for something and start looking to someone, and that is Jesus. Jesus. Jesus who went viral through the gift of the Eucharist. May this mission help us to see the worth of our souls and the change that's wrought by the touch of the Master's hand.